Hey, Whole Five fam. Welcome to today's episode. We have an amazing guest waiting to chat with us today. And before she comes on, I want to spend just a few moments on a little bit of acupuncture theory that I think you'll be interested in. And it all relates to today's guest, so don't think it's for nothing. So let me challenge you about something. You might be thinking about the change of seasons differently from the way I do and from the way my colleagues do. So you probably learned that the beginning of spring starts around March 20th, and then the beginning of summer starts around June 21st, and so on. And we know that we say winter starts like December 21st. Well, in Chinese medicine, we actually see it differently. We pay close attention to the cycles of the moon. So that means that we're actually starting seasons earlier, ahead of time, than the way we look at the seasons in the meteorological sense in the West. For example, this year, Chinese New Year was like the second week in February, and that also coincides with the first moon of February, which is lunar spring. So spring actually began in earlier, mid February. What does that mean? Why should you care? Well, if you think about spring and the fact that it begins in February and sometimes late January, that means that something is starting to shift within nature and therefore within humans, because humans are part of nature. So in the classical medical texts in China, way back in the day, thousands of years ago, they would actually instruct people to follow the rhythm of nature and the rhythm of the seasons to stay healthy and to stay well. So, just taking springtime as an example, what happens in spring? What do we know about the season of spring and what it does in nature? Well, we know that we have more light. Here in the Western Hemisphere, here in North America, in the Mid-Atlantic region, we have warmth beginning to return. We have light beginning to expand. And what does that do to nature? Well, the plants start to shoot up from the ground again. The buds return to the trees again. So if you're a human being, as I am, and I believe you are too, what do you feel like doing? What are your urges in the springtime? For me, I feel like moving more. I feel like I start to crave different foods. Like I want more cold salads, and I want different things to drink than I do in the winter when I want more warm beverages and I want more root vegetables, for example. So I pay attention to all that stuff. And in my treatment room with my patients, I ask them questions like that too, because we want to start noticing what's happening in us as the seasons are changing. And when we are out of sync, out of balance with the change of season, we start to notice conditions. For example, seasonal allergies are an indication that there's some imbalance that we need to adjust and correct and solve for. So another thing that we tend to want to do as the weather gets warmer and as light expands, we want to move our bodies more. So that is how we're going to segue to our next bit of the conversation, where I'm going to talk about our guest. But just hold tight, because I'm not going to get there yet. So just to wrap it up, in the actual Chinese medical texts, if you were to read about the gifts of spring and how we should behave in spring, one of the famous quotes from those texts is that you should take long strides in the courtyard. And what does that really translate to? That means you should stretch. You really need to stretch your body, start moving again. You've been hibernating in wintertime. You've been still and quiet if you've been doing winter right. So after winter comes spring, and that means move yourself. So with all of that said, I'm so excited for you to finally meet our guest. And actually, if you've been listening from day one and you heard the trailer, you may remember this person's voice. You may remember that I was chatting with a very good friend on that episode when we were talking about how this podcast was getting started, and she's back. So let me tell you a little bit about our friend. She's a classically trained dancer who has studied many forms of dance, from ballet to West African dance. And she started at the age of 3 when someone slipped some ballet shoes on her. After the ballet shoes, she went to tap shoes and jazz shoes and point shoes, and sometimes no shoes. She's been dancing ever since, with and without shoes. And she's been diligent about how she incorporates her passion for dance into her life. She's a lifelong wellness enthusiast. And this guest that you're about to meet created something called the Stretch Room. And her intention with that is to bring others to the practice of stretching that she developed for herself during her tenure as a dancer. Our guest is keenly focused on her own wellness and self-care, and now through the Stretch Room, she's sharing those practices with others. Now, in addition to all this, she is a smart cookie. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Virginia's School of Engineering and Applied Science, and she earned an MBA from the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Now, I'm going to put her on the screen so you can see who I'm talking about, but she's not going to say anything quite yet. So at Michigan, she served as the director of choreography for a major annual school production. And then prior to founding the Stretch Room, which she's about to talk to us about, she's traveled the world. She's thrived as an engineer, a management consultant, a higher education administrator, and a business development professional in all kinds of industries. So one thing she likes to say is that she uses both her left and her right brain, and I can totally get down with that. Having had a career in law and then switching to acupuncture, I think it's cool to be able to be fluid in both. So if you listen to the trailer, you know her by her first name, Simone. I said, Simone. Oh my gosh, Simone, I'm starting a podcast, Simone. But you didn't hear her last name. So let me introduce you all to my good friend, Simone Pollard. She's here with us today. Simone, welcome to the Whole 5/5 podcast.
Hey there, Whole 5/5 fam.
And there you are in the Stretch Room.
Yes, in the Stretch Room. Uh-oh.
All the merch. We're going to have to tell people where they can get that, because by the time we're done talking,
Check
they're
it
gonna
out. Check it out.
Start plugging it. They're gonna want that shirt. Okay, so Simone, thank you so much for coming back. We said you'd be back, and you're back.
I am excited to be here.
Yeah, so let me just ask you this. Have you been listening at least to a couple of the episodes? I'm not expecting you to have heard all of them, but just want to know what you think so far.
Yeah, of course. So I've listened to a few of them, and I actually am excited to hear the one where you feature your parents, just because having known them from afar for a while, I think parents are hilarious and also awesome. And I'm sure they have something to say. And I'm also sure that they're really proud of what you are creating. But yeah, so I have listened to some of the podcasts, and I've been inspired by, what I've heard in people's messages. I'm trying to think of the woman who was a pastor, and she started singing. You had her sing.
Cheryl Jones, the healing
I love
power
that
song.
Yes, and then how she said she brought that to clients in the classroom, but also in not hospice, but she's a chaplain in a hospital.
Uh-huh.
And part of the healing that people were able to experience is they were dealing with whatever their ailment was. So yeah, it's been great. I love the Afro-Cuban podcast. So yeah, it's been interesting to hear people's perspective, and I love people, at least the women that I've listened to, just their unapologetic Blackness. I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's kind of coming together. I mean, it's funny because when you and I talked, it was literally just the beginning of the idea. I had not recorded anything yet. It was just like really new and getting started. I think in my assessment, the podcast episodes have been true to the intention that I set out to do, but I've learned so much already from the different guests, and even a lot about myself and about this journey. So I'm so glad that you agreed to come and be an actual official guest on the podcast rather than my confidant, which you still are, of course. And I want everybody to know about what you're up to. So we're going to get into talking all about the Stretch Room. But first, as you know, we start off talking about something very different. So I like to talk about race and healing because we want to start with, lead with the kind of the subject matter at hand and then shift into, okay, so what do we do with that? So let me ask you the first question I ask everybody, if that's okay. When it comes to race, how do you self identify and how do you believe others identify you?
Yeah, so I'm a Black woman. Sometimes I say African American. I also say I'm melanated. I said that today in an exchange with an Indian woman professionally, and she was like, "Ooh, I love that. I'm going to start using that." And I was like, "Yeah, because we are melanated,
Right.
and we're the global majority."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it just depends on my I don't know. I don't even know why I decide to use any of those or which one I decide to use, but those are the ways that I talk about myself. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I will say that I'm a person of color, but I just also think that's a very broad category. And so I also capitalize the B in Black because that's Black. Let's be clear. We are a strong people, but we also have a really present culture.
True. And it's interesting that you brought that up too, because I do the same thing. I capitalize the B and I don't capitalize the W in white when I'm referring to whiteness. And my mom actually asked me that once. She was reading and she was thinking that she was like catching a typo. And I said, no, that was intentional. So I feel like blackness is a culture unto itself. There's white culture, but it's not something that I think that we're wanting to celebrate as much. It's a whole different side of the coin. You know what I mean? So I agree with you that the B in Black is properly capitalized. So there.
And it's also like put some respect on our stuff. So,
Yeah.
if I
Right. Right.
put the B, it draws emphasis and you see it and you pause. And sometimes maybe you'll wonder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice. So, and you believe that other people perceive you correctly? There's no mistaking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in America, right? I mean, you and I've talked about this that white people decide who's white. And if you can pass as white, they might believe you to be white. And we know that in a lot of underrepresented in this country groups or groups of oppressed people, there are always folks who have been able to pass just because of their phenotype and their characteristics. But I mean, I'm a brown person.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's any confusion. When I travel outside of the US, which I've had the opportunity to do quite a bit, I won't say people generally don't assume that I'm American, which I also think is cool.
Yeah.
Particularly in the last 5 years, where being American was not always like what you wanted people to think you are. And so when I travel, particularly where there are other brown people, it's awesome just to blend in. And then unless they hear me talk, they don't know where I'm from. There are lots of people who look like me who are from the continent, from the Caribbean, from Latin America. So like they don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great too, to be able to fly under the radar.
Right. Now, what about your ancestors? Do you know much about where your family comes from and your ancestors and where they came from?
Well, so my both my parents immigrated to this country from the Caribbean. My mom came from Grenada and my father came from Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
So I am very aware of kind of like the migratory path of and it's funny because growing up, sometimes people would be like, "Oh, you're not really Black," because I'm not, they would hear my parents, right,
Mm-hmm.
speak with an accent. And I think that, again, that just kind of speaks to a lack of awareness at that stage in the person's life, right? I mean, I'd like
Mm-hmm.
to believe at this stage people understand the passage and the migration of stolen Africans throughout the diaspora and why we are where we are. And so,
Right.
as I used to say when I was younger in junior high and high school, no, I'm Black. My people just got off the boat or pushed off the boat
Right.
earlier, right? Because there was slavery, and both countries were British colonies. I mean, Grenada at one point was also conquered by the French, but it was most recently a British colony. So slavery, and you think about the Caribbean, it's warm. There are all types of great fruits and vegetables, and then sugar,
Mm-hmm.
which was sold on the global market.
Right.
So beyond that, I don't know. I mean, um, I also know that, like on my mother's side, that we have family in other islands,
Mm-hmm.
because at the time of my grandfather's like prime, folks moved for work. And so he and some of his siblings would go to Trinidad or Venezuela because of oil. And
Mm-hmm.
so, that's why I have family there. It's not it's not uncommon that people of West Indian heritage also have family in the UK and
Mm-hmm.
also increasingly throughout Europe, because again, being a British colony, you could move to the UK, right? And
Right.
so that's also where opportunity was. So I have a whole slew of family in the London area
Mm.
because my grandmother, my dad's mother, at one point left Jamaica to pursue more opportunity. So she went and remarried and had a family there.
Mm-hmm.
And then also some of her siblings migrated from Jamaica um, to England.
Right.
There were opportunities not just for job, but for schooling.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of one of the things that if you were from a colony, an opportunity that was afforded to you
Right.
that and migration there was easier than coming to the US. I mean, US has gotten increasingly harder over the years, but even at that time, you're a former British colony, so you go there. My mom came to America through Canada, so she had
Mm-hmm.
siblings there. And that's usually, again, not uncommon that it might be a sibling or a family member who goes first, and then others end up there just because they feel like there's a connection and a support system, and
Right.
then that begins the migratory pattern.
Interesting. I'd love to do an episode on, someone with experience living both as Black in the UK and in the US, because I know there are some stark differences, and I'm sure there are a lot of similarities too about how Black people are perceived and treated. But I think it's interesting, the way things evolved um, in the US, where the colonization was done here on, the same soil versus the UK, where the colonization was done elsewhere. And I think it kind of changed a little bit about the relationship between Black folks and other
Yeah, but
races
not
in the
really though,
country.
because I mean, I think there's a lot of similar, and I talk to my family, and honestly, I don't even remember that they're in the UK when I talk to them in terms of
Mm,
like giving context. I just like tell the story and then they relate
mm,
to it because
mm,
it's kind of like it doesn't matter. The details don't matter. It's the same level, it's the same oppression, just
mm-hmm.
by maybe a different system or a different oppressor. But it's not like I'm like, oh, well, let me tell you the story. Like I
And
just
they're
forget, or
shocked,
I'll be
like, what?
no, I mean, then they know, and also now with the
Right.
internet, right? Like movements that happen here
Mm,
also get picked up there too, or gives energy to folks to protest. So we saw last year with Black Lives Matter,
mm-hmm.
George Floyd. I mean, it was stuff all throughout Europe, all
Right.
throughout different countries on the continent, throughout the world, quite honestly, because people can relate to it. And so again, they don't know George Floyd. They probably don't even know where Minnesota is, but they're like,
Mm-hmm.
that situation is one that has happened here.
Hmm.
And so
I
even though
guess, yeah. Go ahead. I'm
well,
sorry.
I was just
Go.
gonna say, even though the oppression was like afar, if you will, and yes, those folks have been afforded the opportunity to come to the colonial land, they still are oppressed and are suffering under, racist programs and policies.
True.
So
No
yeah,
doubt.
I think we have a lot in common, and I
Yeah, for
think.
sure.
But
But
I
I
was just
just
going to also,
wonder. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to also say that I think that Black people around the world look at Black Americans for inspiration and
Mm.
also for, I don't want to say permission, but our vocal nature is encouraging to others to like be like, wait a minute, they're speaking out about this. Let me speak out about this.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's some nuance that may be different. But yeah, I totally agree with you that I'm sure there's a lot more similarities than differences. And I'm
Hmm.
particularly fascinated by, of course, hence the name of this podcast, The Whole Five Fifths, by how we baked in to
Hmm.
our founding documents the declaration that essentially, I mean, it's not spelled out this way, but we get it. Black people are
Yep.
3/5 of a person. I mean, it's right there, and we're still reeling from that. And so other countries don't have those same ways of like just actually coming out and saying that, but yeah, the gist of the treatment is still the same.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, thank you for that little sort of world tour of our history collectively and your family specifically. My next question, and maybe you've already started to answer it, is basically how is the construct of race, because we know that we identify in these ways, right? I call myself black, and sometimes I'll refer to myself as biracial if it makes sense to say so. You call yourself black or African American, or, we might both say a person of color if it seems appropriate, but we don't always use those terms. But no matter what we say, we realize that this has been created. It's a construct that was imposed on us, and now we've, made lemonades out of the lemons that we were handed. But how is the construct of race? How has that impacted you, Simone, or people that you love, if you could speak on that?
Yeah, well, I think living in America is the setup to this question around it was baked into the documents that govern this country is the answer, right? Black people were brought here, stolen from the continent, brought here to perform free labor. And so I think that the construct of race then has set the foundation for centuries of marginalization, oppression, but also this expectation that, I'm not valued in the same way. And, a lot of what I've been inspired by is like Black women on social media saying, pay me my worth and no more free labor. And I think that this country, not I think, I mean, if you understand the history, has amassed its riches off of free labor. And so whether people want to outwardly acknowledge it or not, there is this expectation that certain labor is worth paying for and certain labor is not. And if we just kind of look at, how much Black women make to the dollar to, white men in general, but white men, right? We're still not making the complete dollar. So that also shows how race impacts. And I think as a woman, being Black and a woman just means it's like oppression on top of oppression.
Right. Intersectionality, to coin
Yeah, and I've worked
Kimberly
in
Crenshaw.
fields, whether it's engineering or business, where my presence is an act of resistance because there just aren't women, right? Don't dominate in the field at all, and definitely not Black people. And so I remember even when I was an undergrad being told, oh, well, you're like a double minority, in engineering because you're a woman and you're Black. Like, ooh, companies will love that because they get to check two boxes. So yeah, I'm keenly aware of how I walk through the world.
But I love how you just called your presence an act of resistance in itself. And that shifts it for me, because I remember also being referred to as a double minority as well in the field, when I was practicing law and in corporate settings. And I felt a little resentful of it, as if like you're using my identity to your advantage to check these boxes. But by saying it's an act of resistance in a way feels more empowering, like
Yeah.
we're actually doing something to advance the
Well,
culture.
and I also think that it's also a form of resistance because we're not supposed to be here. These systems weren't designed with us in mind.
Right.
And for us to get into those spaces, we usually have to be superb. And then we get there, and as Michelle Obama said, you realize that you finally get into the room thinking that you're going to be having a intellectually stimulating discussion, and you realize, oh, like we really shouldn't be in the same room because I'm like uber qualified and bright, and you're just up here, up on some mediocrity. And so this is why our conversations are confusing, because like you don't have the range, but you have the exposure and you have the frequency of being invited into these spaces.
Right. And so that may be the original affirmative action, right? Like,
Oh, that, of course it is. And that's what I think is so funny. So like last year, there was this article, it was fall of 2019, and it was an article, Harvard University had posted their incoming class profile. And so basically what they were saying is the incoming class was 47% white. And of those students, of that 47%, right, which is a sizable, almost half,
right.
were either legacy admits, people who were connected to money. So maybe your family gave some money, or somebody who gives money was like, hey, let that person in, or you were an athlete. Okay. So that means 1 in 2. So when you talk about, you're saying, I also think about, I have a cousin who graduated from Harvard, and I've followed like some of the movements of Black young people's experience there, where they, have this whole movement about I belong. They made T-shirts because they're made to feel like they don't belong. And the reality is, no, you're probably who does belong, right? I mean,
Right.
if almost 1 in 2 got in, had nothing to do with merit. 1 in 2 white folks, right, had nothing to do with merit. Like, who doesn't belong?
Right.
But that's how it gets flipped, right? To make us feel like we don't belong because we're not supposed to be there. So then they have to find a reason to justify our presence. And because of the myth of white supremacy, they can't believe that you're here on merit. So then they have to chip away and say, oh, well, you're just here on affirmative action, or are you
Right.
an athlete?
Right. Yeah, and that whole affirmative action, using that as, a mark of, some kind of inferiority, when the whole system was set up under a different, model of affirmative action. It's
Oh,
mind
yeah.
boggling.
Well, yeah, because most institutions have preference for legacy. That's the original affirmative action, right? Because
Right.
think about who was able to go to college up until recently. I mean,
Right.
where we went to school, the University of Virginia didn't fully integrate until the 70s, right? So the school's been around for almost 200 years, but didn't fully integrate until like 40 some years ago. So that means you have 100+ years of legacies that will never look like us. And so that's who you're giving preferential treatment to in the admissions process.
It's wild. Well, anything else that you want to share about, like, anything personal, anything recent, or, from the past, like a story that you might have about, having to come up against something,
Yeah, I have a million
racially.
stories. I
I'm
mean, so
sure.
I have a million. That's a whole, I could do like show on show. So I remember one time I was leading an event at a club, a private club, and I was there with my employer, and we parked in a garage because the club has its own, it's like it's downtown, so it has its own garage, and you have to wait, right? So it's valet, you wait, you give them your little thing, they go get your car. And so I was waiting, and there's this older man in front of me, and he had already given his ticket. And I don't even know why he started talking to me, which is like the story of my life. Like, random people just feel the need to engage. And I'm like, why? So he starts talking to me, and I'm on my phone, which is giving him the like, don't talk to me body language.
Right.
And then he was like, where was I coming from? And when he found out that we were at the same event, he almost lost it. So, because of course it's like, oh, well, where are you coming from? I was just at the league. Were you there? Yes, I was there at this. And then he was like, well, I was at this one particular event because, it's a club. It's a pretty large building. So we could have been at different events. So in his mind, I couldn't have been at his event. So when he found out that we were at the same event, like the way he just looked at me, he couldn't believe it. And then he wanted to ask me, which I get asked all the time, where did I go to school? And then when they find out that I went to schools that they consider to be really good schools, they can't handle that. So then he was like, he couldn't believe that I went to UVA undergrad. And I'm just like, again, not giving him any kind of eye contact, on my phone, barely answering his questions. And he was just having a fit. And then and you could just tell there was so much cognitive dissonance because like every answer was like such a surprise to him. So then this man came out of his mouth and was like, well, were you an athlete? And I looked at him. I'm like, and I'm standing there with him, right? So I'm a 5'2" small frame person. So I guess I could have been Simone Biles, but like, that's not what he meant, right? Because in his mind, I'm sure he associates Black people who go to good schools with basketball or football. And since I'm a woman, he was probably assuming basketball. But it made no sense because do I look like a basketball player? No. So then I
Don't
was
forget
like,
track.
well, that's true too, but he's not thinking about that. But even still, right, in his mind, there had to be something else that got me there besides my intellect. And I was like, no, I didn't have time to play sports because of my major. Well, what was your major? Engineering. Then that blew him again. So by
Then
this
he
time,
fell out.
yeah, and he was an older man too, like not like like he really could have fallen out, right? You know what I'm saying? Heart attack with all these surprises that he was getting, and his wife could tell that he was annoying me, and she was trying to pull him, but again, he was too in, and this whole thing was befuddling to him, and So then his car finally gets here, and I'm thinking, well, this man better be like in a Bugatti or something. Like it better be a car that's gonna fly up out of here. And it was like a Tahoe, which is fine. But I'm like, you're sitting here sizing me up, and you're in a Tahoe. Like I'm thinking you should be having a driver. So his wife kind of pulls him off, and the whole time he was just looking as she was being pulled away, and it was so annoying to me because it was like, you're a perfect stranger and you're sizing me up, and everything I'm telling you is so strange to you, but it's not enough. And then once he got in the car, the people who were waiting for their cars behind me, waiting to give their ticket, they were like, what was that about? They were like, so you had to give that man your whole resume, huh? So it was just kind of hilarious because then we kind of bonded, people who I didn't even know were hearing and who were standing behind me. But yeah, that happens to me regularly.
Right. And it's like, you take an incident like that, if it happens once in your life, and it's like, well, that was just an ignorant person. And it happens over and over again. And it's like, we talk about microaggressions, right? So those are very much examples of microaggressions. But like, I had a guest actually on recently who pointed out, as we, sometimes refer to these microaggressions as death by 1,000 cuts. It's like, if this keeps happening over and over and over, and you're constantly being reminded through questioning or sarcasm or subtlety that you don't belong in the spaces that you're in, or that you aren't welcome, or that you shouldn't for some reason be, even if in your spirit, in your heart, even if you were raised to know that you belong, there's still this constant, it's like, if someone nudges you once and they keep nudging you, you're going to end up with a bruise in that spot if they keep doing it. So
well, yeah,
it's
and
what
as I
we have to
mentioned,
carry, right?
what I mentioned the other day when somebody talked about microaggressions, I was like, yeah, but it's still an aggression. So you can put micro all you want in front of it. It's still an aggression.
Yeah.
And like you said, it happens all the time. And I also think it's really hilarious too when I get asked pretty regularly, where'd you go to school? And the person who's asking went to a school that's not even like on the same level. So it's like, well, let me size you up. And then I realize that my educational experiences are, third, fourth tier institutions. And then they say, oh, well, those are good schools. I know.
But then it becomes like a threat. So once you get sized up, if the perception is that you went to a school that's better than the questioner's school, then it's like there's going to be some kind of defensiveness or some kind of other way that they're going to have to figure out how to put you down into a lower category, right?
Yeah.
So we know this. I mean, this isn't anything new, but just for the sake of those listening, we hear you, we see you, we understand, and I think there is some healing in being in the community, and like you said, the people in line behind you who came and said, wow, you had to answer a bunch of questions. I assume that those were Black people. Maybe.
Well, the guy who was right behind me was a white guy. And then there were some people behind him that were Black. And he was the first one that said something because, again,
But he picked up on it pretty loud and clear. He didn't have to be Black to understand what was going on.
Well, yeah. And also because I think my body language suggested that I wanted to, like, I'm done with you, right? I'm not giving you an inviting body language. I'm on my phone, I'm multitasking, and I'm barely answering your questions. Most people with a decent amount of emotional intelligence would be like, oh, she's not trying to engage. And I'm really friendly, but the way that conversation went, I was like, I'm not dealing with you today.
You were putting your guard up. You had your protection, your armor, right? I mean, you let your guard down and you open yourself up to that. And the next thing you know, you're feeling wounded and you didn't do anything wrong. You were just minding your business. So it's like, that's kind of what we have to do. And guess what? As someone in the healing profession, people come into my office and they've got, shoulder tension and chronic headaches and things like that they know have to do with stress. And when you start asking them about stressful aspects of their lives and they're having a hard time kind of pinpointing anything, well, guess what? All those micro, or however you want to characterize the aggressions, adding up, and you having to defend yourself or putting that armor up, even if it's just to kind of ignore the person, is energy draining. It's affecting us. And so, it affects our health, and it affects, we have secondary health conditions as a result, as a community. And
when the exchange is over, you're annoyed, right? Because you're like, what was that? I know that man. What, you know what I mean? You go through all that. It's like they walk off and they're like, ho hum, whatever. But then that sits with us. And then we're like, well, what were they trying to say? Then we're trying to figure out, because as you said, it's an aggression, right? They didn't come straight out and say, oh, I didn't know Black people went to UVA in Michigan. They kind of come about it in these other ways. And so it leads you to wonder, well, what were you trying to say?
Right. And then it goes right back, full circle, all the way back to where you started the stories that you were telling about how we have to be the most excellent, best person in the room. So it reinforces the idea that we have to work twice as hard to get the seat at the table, because people keep reminding you that you don't belong. So it's like, I'm going to prove to you that I do, so much so that you're not going to be able to deny my, my right to be here, or my worth. So I want to kind of shift gears, because I do want to start these conversations off so that we lay a foundation and a context for our shared experience as a community. And I want to resist the kind of temptation to trauma bond, because you and I could go back and forth with these stories all night.
Right.
But I really want people to remember that we also, just like we have the traumatic experiences of oppression that live within us from our personal lives and from our ancestry, that we're carrying these intergenerational traumas from centuries. We also have the medicine in us too. We have the capacity to heal. And as a community, each one of us has like a little bit of the light that we need to add to create the possibility of healing for all of us. And so you bring today a very special gift that you're sharing with the world now, that came, as I said in the introduction of you, from your own practice, from your own self-care. So I would love for you to tell everybody about the Stretch Room and how you came up with the idea, and what can people expect if they wanted to join you in the Stretch Room.
Yeah, so the Stretch Room is about almost a year old, and I'm amazed that it has flourished and just turned into this thing. And what I will say, in full transparency, this is not anything. I mean, yes, I went to business school, but I did not write a business plan for this. It hasn't been something that I've been working on for 10 years, waiting to birth it. It really came out of COVID. And so what I will say is I was able to use my engineering kind of process orientation and my business experience to develop and launch and continue to evolve it. But, it started when the East Coast, particularly this mid-Atlantic, Philly, New York area, was getting locked down pretty early last March. And some of my really good besties were like, hey, you stretch all the time. We're locked in. We haven't been to the gym in a week or two. Why don't you stretch us? And, my usual kind of like, I don't know if I want to commit to stuff. Let me get back to you. And they were like, we're all locked down. Like, what do you mean? Yeah, they're like, check your schedule. What are you talking about? So then I started stretching them, and we would get together a couple times a week and just stretch. And then it got to the point where over like probably a 2-week period, it started growing. More people started finding out more about like our friend circle. So people that I knew started asking, yeah, hey, I heard that you're doing X, Y, and Z. Can I show up? So I'd send them the link. And then people started asking to bring folks I didn't know. And that's when the switch clicked in my head. And I was like, whoa, let me put this MBA to good use. And if people are asking for it, there's a demand, right? And as I always say, give the people what they want. So I then just put myself on a pretty rapid schedule for by tax day of last year, I was going to launch an offering and collect funds to charge for my service. And I cannot say that when I did this, I thought that it would be healing, because for me, it was about movement. It was about encouraging others to move. And I stretch all the time myself. So I've just kind of gotten used to it. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to now do it with some other people on the screen at night. It wasn't that deep to me. And you were probably one of the first people who were like, you're doing healing work, right? And I was like, really? You think so? And then somebody else mentioned that to me. And then I've heard it a few times since then. And when you hear something a couple times, you pause. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe what Leah was saying, maybe Leah was like onto something.
It wasn't good enough for me to tell you. You had to
no.
hear 3 other people.
As I said, when you said it, I was like, healing, that just sounds like big. That sounds like, more prescriptive. It just sounds like more than what I thought I was doing. Healing, that word just is powerful, right? And so, but because people have said that to me a number of times, people have also, I've started, I was always doing group sessions, done some private sessions, but I guess probably 2 months after I launched, I started again with my business hat. I was like, I'm doing corporate events, I'm doing conferences, like that's the goal I'm setting for myself.
Right.
And so I started doing those events and I started talking to people who were like hiring me for those. And I heard that there's also some significance that I'm doing wellness work in my body, in this body, this Black woman body. Because a lot of the wellness practitioners that at least corporations tell me they hire don't look anything like me. And also don't have my...
Again, a space that you look around and you could be told, well, you don't really belong here. Not overtly, but just from looking around, like you just said, like nobody looks like you in this space.
And they don't have my background, right? So the other thing too is a lot of times wellness people, they might be like physical trainers or a yoga instructor, but people are enamored by my story. And they're like, what, you're an engineer? What, you went to business school? What, like you've worked in corporate? Like what, who are you, right? So like all of that is just intriguing to people. And then they're like, you dance and like all of that. And so there's a kind of
I'm a whole person. I'm well-rounded, right?
Right. So like I bring that legitimacy to it. And I think having been in corporate spaces, I know the conference game, I know the budget game, I know HR, I know wellness, like I know the pockets where money sits. And I know the types of events that people will put on for their employees and for their clients. And so that allows me to be really laser focused on making pitches and speaking from a place of experience. I've been to a lot of these industry conferences. I think they're cool when at the end of this day of sessions, we are going on a hike or, we are being cooked this fabulous meal that is wholesome and it's not just junk. Like those are the things that always catch my attention and that I'm like, oh, this conference is going to get a good rating for me because they have kind bars. Like, yes, thank you. Kind bars and like a good quality beverage versus a bagel and donuts, which is not what I eat for breakfast.
Right.
So I've offered this and I have a set of regular women who come throughout the month. And then I have done a ton of corporate events, conferences. I've done some wellness programming for corporations too. And it's just been really exciting for me because I like a challenge and I like to set goals for myself and achieve them. It is not lost on me now 10 months into this journey that what I'm doing is important, what I'm doing is needed. And I also know that Black women don't necessarily gravitate towards a yoga studio. And I'm very mindful that when people sometimes, particularly my corporate folks, will be like, okay, we're going to call it a yoga session. I'm like, let's not. I'm going to give you the language.
You're very intentional. You're very intentional, right? About calling it stretching, the stretch room.
Because I know that yoga isn't inviting to a lot of people. And so people also have... Yoga comes with its own meaning and sometimes baggage for people. And so let's not use something and then have people pleasantly surprised. Let's just call it what it is, which sounds like, hey, everybody can stretch. I did an event, a private event last night, and it was a pre-recorded event. And the tech team, they did it and they all showed up in like khakis. The women had on skirts. And they were there just to collect the content and do the editing after. But then they told me that while I was on screen, they were doing it. And I loved it because nobody changed, right? It's something that you can do, come as you are. Now, clearly, if you want to get more into it, you should probably wear some clothes that have some elasticity. But it's not this intimidating thing that I think a lot of times come with a practice like yoga, where people in their mind are thinking, I can't put my foot behind my head, so I'll just pass. Or I have some body image issues, and so I don't want to do that either, right? And so I tell people, I've had some people who are like, well, let me get in shape before I come to the stretch room. I'm like, nah, that's not what it is. Like, we're not, again, this is not Simone Biles jumping off of the balance beam. You can bring your out of shape body, right? Because now we've been in this COVID lockdown for almost a year. You can bring that to the stretch room. Like, why not? And nobody's looking at you. They're looking at me. So you don't need to get in shape.
You can turn your camera off, right?
Yeah, you can turn your camera off. And it's kind of like when you go to the gym, you don't wait till you get in shape to go to the gym. You go to the gym, right? To do that. And so it's a process. And so, yes, to your point, if you are feeling shy, turn your camera off. Like, I love the engagement with people, but I've also done events with, hundreds of folks where because of the platform we're using, I can't see the people anyway. So I've gotten comfortable with that. But I want you to get the experience and I want you to get what this greatness that comes from stretching can bring you and your body and your wellness. And so if that means you got to cut the camera off, cut it off.
I am so, is it okay to say I'm proud of you? I mean, the way I feel like proud of my friends sometimes, you know? I'm not your parent, but you're sitting here telling me that this idea started from a conversation with some friends that you kind of didn't even feel like committing to, okay, I'll help you guys stretch out. I don't know why you can't do this on your own like
You're
a normal
right. I was
person,
like,
but
what?
like
Well,
I
another
do
thing too
every
was,
day.
yeah, these are like some of my best friends who I've traveled with. And so like, it's always a joke, when we stay in a hotel, like, well, what time are you going to get ready? Because they know I stretch in the morning. So like, that's why it
Right.
was funny, because it's like, oh, so now you want this? Like you've been
Mm.
teasing me about this and talking about this all these years. And
Right.
now you want some
Now
of
you
this.
want some of this.
So
So
that's why it was
yeah,
funny.
it's amazing. I feel like I would love to hear some of the other stories that people have about what was invented during this pandemic time. But for you,
Yeah.
clearly, it happened early on within the first couple of weeks. But you said 10 months. It hasn't even been a full year. And you're talking about corporate events. You're talking about, all these, skills and experiences that you have that are transferable right into this little concept that you grew starting with yourself and a few friends. It's just amazing, Simone. I'm going to try to put up, pardon my new
Can I
technology,
say 10 months? Because
try to
technically
put
I
it up
went
on the,
live for fee.
mm-hmm.
Uh-oh, I see it. In
Hey.
April, it was tax day, April 15th, but I had probably been doing it, I don't know, mid-March, I guess it was maybe mid to late March.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, because initially when people started asking, I knew I could monetize this.
Mm-hmm.
I first was like, oh, I'll start it in May. And I didn't know how long Corona would last, the lockdown. And I forced myself, I was like, I don't need to wait till May. Like, just push yourself and get it done on tax day because it's
Mm.
tax day.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, too, is I'm a perfectionist. And I knew that if I gave myself more time, I would sit here and iterate and iterate and iterate. And it's not
Right.
necessary. Just
Right.
start and start evolving from there.
That's another admirable trait or admirable, I guess, way that you went about it, because I do know you personally and I know myself, and we're a little bit alike when it comes to wanting things to be just right and wanting,
Just
dare I say perfect, and so to say, you know what, perfect is the enemy of good. I'm going to start off and do something really good really well, and then perfection will be, contained within that, and I'll just make it more and more perfect. But like if we start off with like I have this vision and it's got to be this way, it's got to be, just so before I even start, like you said, you run the risk of never starting. So I just wanted to
yeah.
flash up your website. I got that right? It's your
Yeah, that's
name,
great. I love it.
SimonePollard.com. I want people to see that, remember that. I think I can wait, hold on. I might have to take it off for a second, but like wait, oh man, there's a way I can make it a little crawl. But anyway, I'll put that
Um,
back. We'll put it back at the end. It's there. It's
Well,
available.
the other thing I want to say too is, and I had
Mm-hmm.
talked to this like coach, and that was her words, just start.
Yeah.
And not that she knew that I was, but I told her I was a perfectionist. So her whole thing is she just encourages people to start. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing that pushed me over the edge too was I was like, I have a window, right? So with my business brain, I was like, this is my opportunity. I don't know how long
Right.
this
Right.
opportunity will be here because, we're in lockdown. People are home. Gyms, at least in my area, gyms had been closed for since the beginning of the lockdown.
Right.
So there was a real void that I could fill. And I
Right.
didn't know if I waited 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks, if the gyms would open back up and then I might lose my captive audience. And the other piece
Mm-hmm.
too is now in hindsight, knowing what we know about COVID, even if
Mm-hmm.
the gyms open, because they eventually did, but people didn't go back in the same number.
Mm-hmm.
But still, we didn't. It was so much that we didn't know. But I was like, I need to start now and just maximize this opportunity because I don't know how wide this window is.
Right. Seize the day. And when I was listening to we shifted gears talking about racism and the impact of the construct of race on us. And the sound, the tone of your voice when we started talking about the stretch room just completely changed. I mean, even the smile on your face, it's so, I mean, you light up when you talk about it, right? There's some enthusiasm. And that's how I know when someone's on to, their true gifts. And I'm wondering if you believe that this is your calling in some way.
Well, So I don't know, because again, to me, that sounds deep, like you're doing healing
You
work.
know I'm gonna go
And
deep.
so I don't know. Is it my calling? I think that it's not lost on me that I've been dancing since I was 3, and my parents invested a time and money in my dance training, and therefore the fact that I'm using that, I have used it throughout my life to stay fit, but also to express myself. And now I'm using it in a different way. Like to
Mm-hmm.
me, it is not lost on me that foundation that was laid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I also realized that there aren't a lot of people who are me, right? There aren't a lot of people who have
There's
chemical engineering
nobody who's you.
backgrounds
You're the only
who
you.
yeah, and so there's something unique about that packaging. Well, when I say that, again, there are wellness enthusiasts out there, but I
Right.
think that I can differentiate myself from them, just like
Mm-hmm.
there are engineers out there. But like, I'm a social engineer, so I know I've always been different in that light. And
Mm-hmm.
so, is this my calling? I don't know. I think that that will be revealed by how I continue to use this. But what I do
Mm.
know is that. Um, I have a gift that that other people um, that I can give to other people and that other people receive with open arms, and
Mm-hmm.
that impacts their life. So that I
Okay.
do know.
Well, let me offer you this before we move on to a couple more questions I have for you. There's a quote that I remember from when I was in school from a man named Frederick Buchner, I believe. But anyway, he said, "To find your calling is to find the intersection between the world's deep gladness." I messed it up. To find your calling is to find the intersection between the world's deep hunger and your own deep gladness. So, what makes you light up? What makes you happy? And like you could be doing something that makes you happy, but nobody cares. If the world has a deep hunger for it,
Yep.
as you found during COVID, there was this hunger. It started with your friends, but then you found out other people were hungry to be helped to stretch out and to move their bodies in a certain way. So when you find that intersection, you might be onto your calling. We'll see. I guess you said like it's gonna keep evolving and being shaped, and you're following. I love how you're following, where it leads you. It's amazing. I have another question for you about it. What surprised you most about this part of the journey so far in the last 10 months? Like, what were you surprised about that came out of it?
Um, so I'll say just how I've been able to take this thing and blow it up. But
Mm-hmm.
then when I know myself or other people who know me, they're like, that's kind of you. But
Mm-hmm.
it is, it's surprising because that also has been reaffirmed, right? When I talk to people who I've met along this journey who see what I've been able to do, and then they find out that I haven't been doing this for years, they are
Mm-hmm.
surprised,
Yeah.
right? And so I even had this one wellness woman who's been doing this stuff for like 25 years tell me, well, she asked, and she was a white woman, she was like, well, how do you know how to do all that? And so that also took me back. But I'm like, well,
Was that like a
I,
check on your credentials, do you think?
well, no, because I think that she realized that I'm doing stuff that she doesn't even know how to do.
Mm.
So while she has years in it, her model is clearly not uh, revolutionary or even relevant, right? I mean, it's an
Mm-hmm.
old model, and the way that she kind of moves through this space is not utilizing social media
Mm.
um, or being targeted or segmenting the market, like using some of the things that are just intrinsic to how I approach, business. And so
Right.
when she asked, I was confused because I'm like, no, no, what? And she was like, well, all the stuff that you're doing. And I was like, well, one, because I have sense, and two, I mean, I've done this for other people. I've done this for companies, right? I mean, I've
Mm-hmm.
like moved into markets around the world and launched businesses. So there's some skills that I have, and let's not
Right.
act like I just showed up here because I'm new to this and
Right.
I showed up an empty vessel. Like the
Mm-hmm.
vessel came fully full. The vessel came
Right.
full. It came with reserves. Um, and so that's what I mean, where there are a lot of people in this space that don't have my training and background.
Mm-hmm.
So they might know wellness, or they might, I don't know, be able to like talk wellness, but they don't really
Right.
know about business, and they don't know
Right.
about, how to utilize technology to like leverage their offering.
Yeah. So on the one hand, you were surprised about how it took off and how you were able to build what you built in a short amount of time. But when someone else kind of asks into it, you're like, well, no, I shouldn't be surprised. I have all this background. So it's like that's fun, when you kind of had this dual kind of way of holding something like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. I'm really doing this. And then the other part of you is like, yeah, I'm doing this. Of course I'm doing this.
Right, it's like that. But I also know that there are tons of people who have great ideas, right? That
Right.
nothing happens with them.
Yes.
So I don't want to discount what I've been able to do either,
Yeah.
right? So I want to
Right.
appreciate that, hold it up, recognize it, but not be like, oh, whatever, that's easy. Because, there are tons of people. I have this quote too, and it talks about how, there are tons of people, and I can't quite remember it, but the
Mm-hmm.
whole thing is like, neighborhoods are full of people with great ideas that could tell
Mm-hmm.
you their ideas, but their idea is still sitting with them. Meaning
Right.
that it takes more than having a good idea. It takes more than being able to tell somebody about it. It takes discipline. It takes some research. It takes some effort. And it takes some knowledge about kind of like business. And not everybody's willing to invest beyond having the idea.
Right. It's amazing what you've done. And I want to make sure before we wrap up, because I have another major question that I haven't asked you, and we've alluded to it because you put it on me. You said, oh, Leah, you were one of the first people that said what I'm doing is healing work. So I want to know from you, Simone, what is your definition of healing? You said it was kind of a big word. So what in your own words, what does healing mean to you?
Yeah. So I think it is, getting in touch with what is hurting or the soft or sore spot,
Mm-hmm.
or the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And it is catering to that, nurturing that,
Mm.
um, feeding that, right? Paying attention to that and giving it what it needs so that it
Mm-hmm.
moves from being maybe the trigger that it was to being less of a trigger, or
Mm.
it might still be a soft spot. It will take some time before you maybe can touch it and feel no kind of reaction, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's less of a soft spot. So I
Mm.
think that it's recognizing like where the pain or the hurt is, and
Mm-hmm.
then feeding it and giving it what
Right.
it needs, paying attention
Ooh.
to it, soothing it. Um,
And when you say that, and I can see you, for people who are listening, they can't see you, but I can see you're kind of touching your physical body. Like you're giving an
mhm.
example of like as if a pain on your arm. But when
Yeah,
I'm hearing you, I'm also hearing soft spot and pain and tenderness also as potentially not just physical, as emotional,
hmm,
and we started talking about racism in the first part of the show, you know, those are small but significant everyday wounds that get reopened when we have those moments of aggressions, so there's
yeah.
pain there. But like you said, soothing and healing and paying attention to and giving it what it needs. So I feel like you just spoke in terms of more than just the physical, and when
Yeah,
it comes to
definitely.
healing.
Because even going back to what we were saying earlier about how people ask ridiculous questions, and for it just seems like I get a lot of that, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
um, I've now been more conscious. Like, I don't, when you ask me where I went to school, I don't necessarily care where you went, but I'm like, you know what, Simone? No, ask them so that you leave at least with as much information as they're leaving this exchange with. And that's how I've come to realize people have gone to places that I'm like, you asking me, please, right? But and so it also allows me to leave the interaction there as opposed to
Right.
taking it with me. So I also
Right.
think
And feeling
healing,
defensive
yeah,
about
or
it.
wondering
Like
what's
you're
happening.
on the
Like,
spot. Hmm.
right. I'm like, you're not just going to make me uncomfortable. Like, you're also going to be uncomfortable because I'm going to ask you too. And I
Hmm.
have to be intentional because, like I said, I don't really care where these people went to school, but it's more about evening the playing field. And so I think healing is also figuring out how to protect yourself or to
Mm.
defend yourself so that
Mm.
the wound doesn't deepen or we don't add more to it.
Or
So
re-injure ourselves
right, or
after an injury.
re-injure, right?
Yeah.
So the emotional piece of it is okay, so I don't care, but I'm gonna ask because that allows me to leave that interaction right there.
Hmm. Nice. Okay, I'm going to put your website back up on the screen because I know how to do that now. And
Okay.
I want a real clear understanding of what they're going to find. I want people to know what they're going to find when they go to simonepollard.com and consider participating in what you're offering in these classes. Like give us When do they take place? What can people expect upon entering the stretch room?
Yeah, so the stretch room is where the ultimate stretching experience happens. So the website has information about classes, the benefits of stretching. There's some testimonials there, particularly for people who are like, well, what is stretching and why would I do that? The stretch room is open to the public Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Through the website, you can not only see what I'm saying, but it will link you to my class management system where you register for a class and you pay for the class. And then from there, everything is pretty automated. So you'll get a confirmation email that includes the link to the class that allows you to join the stretch room at said time. So I think it's pretty intuitive, but my information is there. My email, my phone number are there. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. But the point of the website is, again, to your question, Leah, about how did this thing start? I started with just a landing page because I knew that I had to have a place to send people, right? And then from there, I've built out these additional pages. And so now, I don't know, I have maybe 10 pages because as people ask me things, I was like, maybe that's some content I need to put on the website. So if you want to know the benefits, instead of me telling you, I'm just going to put it on the website. So the evolution of my website has really been a function of kind of things that I had planned over time, but also questions that people were asking me that gave me indication that, okay, this is probably some helpful content.
Right. And let me just give my own testimonial now. I've been sitting on my hands a little bit here, trying to sit tight because I want you to talk about it, but I need to talk about something because I've been to the stretch room. And after having attended some sessions, what drew me and what I was moved to say to you about this healing benefit is that what you do, you're not just stretching people in the stretch room. I could watch some video of some random person that I got off of YouTube if I wanted to just get some good ideas about stretching. You're creating community for people. I have to tell people, Simone doesn't just say, okay, y'all getting ready to stretch in 5 minutes. I'll be back. I'm going to go get some water. She's welcoming people in. You're creating community. You're making people feel welcome. You're saying, oh, Melissa, you're in Chicago. Frida's in Chicago too. Oh my God, y'all must live down the street from each other, I think, And then like instantly you can't help but feel like you belong in the stretch room when Simone welcomes you in. So that whole bit about we were talking about before about what happens in this culture and when we're Black, we're kind of constantly being reminded that we don't belong. You are the antidote to that with the stretch room. In addition to what you're offering with stretches, you're reminding people if you came into the stretch room, you belong here. There's no one that is not welcome, and it's a community vibe. And that in and of itself, in my view, is healing. So it's healing on healing on healing. You know what I mean? It's community. It's emotional support. It's you encourage people. I mean, you watching people as long as they have their cameras on, you can see them. You're saying, oh, I see you're kind of struggling over there. You could do it. Or you don't say you're struggling, but you see
Right.
people struggling and you encourage them. Come on, you can do this. You've got this. And those are the things I love about the stretch room that may or may not be apparent from going to the website, because you kind of have to just show up in the stretch room and experience it for yourself.
Well, and so I appreciate that you've put pause there because that's something else that I gloss over. But that's like my personality, right? And so maybe,
Yes.
maybe maybe I don't like talk about it because I'm like, well, of course, when you come up in here, I'm gonna call you by your name, and we're gonna have some fodder, as I call it, and some preamble and some jokes. And I get to know people, and like you said, I link people up because I like to connect people.
Right.
So yeah, I don't talk about that because that's kind of like,
Because
well,
that's
yeah,
who you are.
if you know me, like you're not just coming up in here and putting your leg in a position and stretching. Like we're
Right.
gonna do all that because I am really intense and I want people to get the most from it. But
Because we are what? Fancy.
fancy, we are fancy. We are
You have
fancy,
all these
and
Simone-isms that come up
we
in the stretch
are,
rooms.
yeah. That I'm like,
But
we
we
gotta
don't want
think
to
like
give
a
them all
women.
away. People need to show up.
You need to show up. And as I say to folks in the stretch room or people who are interested, I'm like, well, look, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So, I mean, that's the other thing, right? So COVID will be over. And even when COVID is over, there's going to be a need to continue
Right.
because this world requires that we pour into ourselves.
Yes.
But yes, it is. it is probably not helpful for me not to give that full technicolor, because people who know me, they know when they walk up in there, it's going to be some stuff, because they know my spirit, they know my personality.
Some
But you're
flavor.
right, there are people who don't. So
Yes, they need to
um,
know and they need to
you,
find out for themselves because it's hard to put to words. It's an experience, the stretch room experience. And you've got merch. You've got
yes, I have
t-shirts and
merch.
tank tops. Do you
Because
have
again,
bags
giving
yet?
people what they want, people were like, "Oh, I want a shirt. I want a shirt." And I was like, "Okay, we're stretching." So fine. So I just, turned on a dime, pivoted, did some research, came up with a logo, got a vendor. We had
You make it
shirts.
sound so easy. And it
Got
can be.
shirts.
It can be. And wait, do you have bags
And
yet? Because
stretch
you know how you
bands.
say, we love a bag.
Everybody loves a bag. Well, I can't say every Black people love a bag. Don't go to a family reunion or a work conference, because they're the main ones looking for the bag. And I'm like, a
Hello.
bag? Yes. So no, I don't, but maybe. I have t-shirts, tank racerbacks, and stretch bands.
And we need a
Because
bag to put those things in, of course.
we probably do. We probably need a
But right
little
now we're not
bag.
going anywhere because we're in a pandemic. So we don't really need
Yeah,
these
your stuff
bags.
is right in your house. Wherever you left it the last time you were in the stretch room, it's right there.
Right.
Right
Right.
there.
So
But
we
no, it's been
are
great.
we are running out of time, unfortunately. But you came. This is
No.
your second time here on the Whole Five Fifths podcast, so I have no doubt that we will find a way to bring you back on. I didn't really get to ask you about your own self care routine, but I think your whole, you know, this whole show has been about your self care routine, and you're just sharing your self care with
With other
everybody
people.
else.
But I also
Yeah,
eat. I like to eat, and I like to
yeah.
have
Tell me about that.
desserts. Well, I just like to eat. I mean, eating is like important. I think about food, and I like to eat, and I like to be nourished, and I like to eat good quality stuff. Um, and I also like to bake, and that comes from my mom, who always had, as my friends would say, a cake on the table. I mean, Leah, my mom was the queen of, there was either a cake on the table when we were in school. People would
Yep.
be excited for me to come back from home, because not because they were seeing me. Oh, Simone made it back safely. No, they're like,
Right.
"What
No,
kind of
because you
cake
would
you
have
have?"
food and
Yeah,
you'd have oxtail and all kinds of
all kinds of
deliciousness. Yeah.
cakes and all kinds. Yeah, like, yeah, I was the secondary thing. So I enjoy baking, and I also treat myself. But I'm not going to eat like, Chips Ahoy. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'd rather get like a really great chocolate chip cookie from like a bakery, or I'll make it.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
something that you can really indulge in, because I also think we have to take care of ourselves and treat ourselves. And that
Right.
is in itself, and sleep,
Mm-hmm.
because rest is also an act of resistance.
Absolutely.
Get your
Absolutely.
rest.
And to tie it all in, the nights that I have been to the stretch room, I sleep like a baby. It's like, and you know this, I was indulging in a bit too much wine throughout the pandemic. I've gotten that under control. I haven't had a drink since December 31st, 2020. However, I was a little bit OC with the wine. And when I would go to the stretch room, no wine, won't need any wine because I feel the same way I feel after, coming down off of the tension of the
Yep.
day after stretching. So
And that's what people
good
tell me. Like,
stuff.
they get their best sleep the nights they come to the stretch room. I've had
Mm-hmm.
insomniacs who have been, grief stricken or dealing with all this negative, sad stuff in the world, who are
Mm-hmm.
like, I actually have been able to sleep. Maybe not the whole night, but it's better than being up all night. And so I can
Right.
get a good 4 to 6 hours, which is great.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Simone, I'm so happy that you've offered this and you've shared this with the world and they have heard it here on the Whole Five Fifths podcast.
The
You,
whole
if
five
you're,
bits.
yes. And if you're watching, you see the website, SimonePollard.com. Listening, it's Simone,
You see my
Simone. Don't forget the E, Pollard, Pollard, two L's in Pollard.com. I will put all this in the show notes for the episode. And
And
let's go ahead.
congratulations to you, Leah. I mean, let's
Oh,
talk about, in the spirit of reciprocity. I mean, you're doing it. We've had these conversations, for the last umpteen years since we've known each other. And the fact that
mm-hmm.
you also have put pen to paper, and you're like, look, I'm going to raise this voice. And that's what I love about the episodes that I've listened to, is that there are other folks out there who are just as unapologetic, just as aware, just as
Mm-hmm.
proud, and also calling stuff out. Like, the foolishness that you experience, it's validating to hear other people. It's sad, but it's also validating.
Right. And I feel like, thank you for acknowledging that, Simone, because like I've been saying and thinking to myself, this is like a healing journey for me as much as it is, I'm hopeful for other people listening. So I'm kind of along the journey myself. And to, like you said, it is validating to hear other people say, because this actually all grew out of, the pandemic, of course, but very particular conversations that I was in that you were there for me to hear about, where I was up against somebody who was trying to tell me that systemic racism did not exist and that this was in my head and that I'm drinking some type of Kool-Aid
No,
if
I
I
was like,
believe it.
girl,
And
walk
I was
away.
so, yes, you were like, don't be in that conversation. You do not, that is not yours
I
to
was like, we
have.
don't have time for that. That's not our
And
work.
right. And I realized like my whole life, I have been engaging in these kinds of conversations. Like I'm some kind of ambassador that I'm supposed to be involved in these, the ridiculousness of these conversations. Like I don't need to entertain you or that anymore. I know what I'm experiencing. I know what's real. I know what's happening. I know my history. And I've been reading and studying and learning, even
All
more
those
so.
parts.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of times when
So,
people want to deny all this is because they don't want to deal with it. Because if they deal with it and accept it, then it makes them feel bad. And if they feel bad, they'll have to take action. Again,
right,
not my work.
right, right. Whew. Okay. Well, this has been awesome. And I just love talking to you, as you know. So we will keep talking off air. But um, yeah, we'll see you next time you come. And that's going to do it for the whole 5/5 podcast, everybody.
Bye, whole
See
five fist fam.
you. Bye. And
Bye.
we're out. Peace.